Hey everyone, welcome to Amanda's Book Corner. I'm Amanda, and welcome to my newest feature that I'm going to be doing on my channel from now on. Every month I have a reading challenge, which I have talked about a little bit, and I decided that from now on I'm going to start doing some monthly wrap-ups of the books I read for that reading challenge. So in this video, I'm going to talk about all the books I read for my April reading challenge, which was to read books set in Paris. So out of the 10 books that I read in April, 4 of them were set in Paris and thus count for this reading challenge. The first Paris book that I read in April is called The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. It's a thriller, and like her previous 2 books, which I also read and loved, this one has multiple points of view and some maybe not so likable characters. The author's previous 2 thrillers, The Hunting Party and The Guest List, were both wonderful in my opinion. I really enjoyed both of them, and I was really looking forward to this one. This one is like them in certain ways. Like I just mentioned, it has multiple points of view and has some characters that are not always the most likable. But this one is also different from the other 2 in that the inciting event happens right at the beginning. Instead of knowing that something bad is going to happen later on and kind of going back and forth in time leading up to some big event at the end of the book, this one actually starts off with a brother's disappearance. It starts off when Jess leaves her home in England to go to Paris, which is where her brother is living, and she needs a restart. She has just gotten out of some bad situations there, and she's hoping to crash with her brother for a little while until she gets back on her feet again. But when she arrives at his home in Paris, he's not there, and he's not answering his phone, and he's left behind his wallet, and there's a lot of really weird stuff going on that she can't really explain, and she starts to be really worried about what happened to her brother. So this turns into a mystery as Jess works to uncover what happened to her brother. The police are not much help, and the people who live in her building are also not much help. So while Jess is playing at being Nancy Drew and uncovering this mystery, we also get point of view chapters from the other characters, the people that live in the building, and kind of get to know their personalities, their issues that they have, what kind of secrets they might have, and eventually it starts to come together and the picture becomes clearer. I think the characters were more likable in this book than in Lucy Foley's previous 2 books, to a degree. I mean, I don't think they're likable, but they definitely, instead of being unlikable, they're more troubled or flawed or something like that. So I didn't hate them, but they definitely had their issues. The chapters are all pretty short, so it makes for a quick read, although I did feel like the pacing was a little bit slow at times, and it felt a little bit repetitive at times too. I did really like the setting though. I liked getting to know Paris in a kind of creepy way, and I liked how this book wove in some different themes that were a little bit heavier or more political in a way. Not political, I wouldn't say it's political, but it does bring in some bigger issues, which I thought were pretty interesting. So I like this book a lot. I didn't like it quite as much as her other 2 books, but I still really enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars. The second Paris book I read is called Paris is Always a Good Idea by Jen McKinley. I actually listened to this as an audiobook, and it was a really wonderful listen. The book follows Chelsea Martin, who is almost 30 years old, and it's been 7 years since her mother passed away, and since she really was living her life fully and happily. Ever since her mother passed away, she's kind of been going through the motions, and she's really focused on her career instead of developing personal relationships, and she kind of feels a little bit broken inside. The last time she was happy was right before her mother died, when she was going on a tour of Europe. She spent a year traveling between Ireland and France and Italy and other countries as well, and she had relationships with 3 different guys during that year, and Chelsea decided that maybe the way to get back to herself and kind of reclaim her happiness is to go back to Europe, go to these 3 countries that really stood out during her trip, and see if she can find those guys, reconnect with them, maybe see if she can still feel love for them, and just reconnect with who she used to be. So I was really drawn to this book, partially because I also lost a parent. My dad passed away 9 years ago, and I really thought that this is something I could relate to in a certain way. I wouldn't say that I've become broken since my dad died, but it definitely did change certain things about my personality, I think. But I also liked the idea of her going to Europe because I also have lived in Europe. I lived in Europe for about a year, in Spain specifically, and I really thought that this book was something I could relate to on 2 different levels. When it started off, I wasn't so sure if I was going to love it because I thought it felt like it might be a little bit too heavy and too weepy, but it also did have some humor, and I really started to like it more and more as it went along. For me, the book really got interesting once Chelsea arrived in Ireland, and I really enjoyed the chapters that were set there. From there, she eventually goes on to France, specifically Paris, which is why it counts for my reading challenge. She did spend some time in Paris, and eventually she ends up in Italy. I really enjoyed seeing Chelsea get to revisit these different places that she used to live, seeing the different cultures of Ireland, France, and Italy, and reconnecting with these guys and seeing how things between them might be different than they were before. There are various reasons that the relationships with these guys may or may not work out, but all through this, Chelsea's also working remotely with a co-worker who's back home in Boston. His name is Jason Knightley, and it's fairly obvious from the get-go that he's actually going to be maybe the potential romantic partner for her. They're definitely at odds in a lot of ways, and it is definitely a kind of enemies to lovers and also work romance. But I really did like his character, and he became much more likable as the story went on. I also really liked how Chelsea and his relationship developed throughout the chapters. And as Chelsea is finding herself and reclaiming a certain part of herself that she lost, I really like that it also dives into some deeper issues. It does really examine her grief and what life is like after losing someone that you care about so much. And it also looks at how you can still find love and how you can still form relationships with other people. So this book has a lot of heart, but it's also really fun and funny and adventurous. I thought it was a really perfect balance. It wasn't too weepy, but it wasn't too silly. I thought it was really just wonderfully done, and although I wasn't sure at the beginning, I ended up giving this one 5 stars. The next book I read is a novella called The Duke Makes Me Feel by Adriana Herrera. Now, I'll be honest, I actually wanted to read her new book called A Caribbean Heiress in Paris. It has Paris right in the title, but that book doesn't come out until the end of May, and although I requested an ARC of it on NetGalley, I have not yet been approved. So fingers crossed I'll get one, but I didn't get one in time for the Paris reading challenge. Luckily for me, the author did just make her novella available, so I read that instead. The Duke Makes Me Feel was originally included in an anthology called Duke I'd Like to F, so that sounds pretty spicy. And not surprisingly, this one is also a rather spicy romance. It starts off in the late 1800s in London, and there we meet Morena, who is an immigrant from the Caribbean. She's a biracial Black Latinx woman, and she's also working class. And one day, when she's working at her shop, which is an apothecary, a duke comes into her shop asking her questions that only she can help him with. It turns out he's looking for a half-sister that he didn't know he had until his father died. And he's trying to track her down so that he can get her inheritance and drastically change her life for the better. Morena doesn't entirely trust him, but in the end she does decide to help him. It turns out that his half-sister, who is also her best friend, is living in Paris. So the two of them travel to Paris to track her down, and while they're tracking her down, the two of them also start to form a bit of a relationship with each other. They're both attracted to each other, and against Morena's better judgment, they do end up forming some kind of a relationship that she's not really sure will actually work out between them. She has some serious reservations because she's from a working class background and he is a duke. There's also the issue of her race because, again, this is the 1800s, and I mean, there's racism now. There is definitely a lot of racism back then as well, and so she's not really sure that a relationship with him could ever work out. So I did enjoy this book. I thought it was really interesting, and it brought up a lot of thought-provoking ideas, and I did like the two different storylines, one between him trying to find his lost sister, and also her and him developing a relationship against all the odds. I did think it was a little bit maybe too focused on their physical intimacy, and I don't mind that, but I did think that there wasn't enough time between those scenes to really develop their actual relationship and their actual mental and emotional connection. So I did think it felt a little bit unbalanced. I think if it had been a full-length novel and the additional pages had really focused on those elements, I think it would have felt a lot more complete and believable. I did still like it, but it just felt a little bit unbelievable to me. So I'll probably give this one 3 or 3.5 stars. I'm not sure. Regardless, I'm still really looking forward to A Caribbean Heiress in Paris because that one's a full-length novel and it just sounds wonderful, so I'm really excited to read that one next. The last book I read is called The Age of Light by Whitney Scherer. This is a historical fiction novel that I've had on my shelf for about 3 years. I got it from Book in the Month in probably February 2019, so it's been a little while. The story starts in 1929, it goes through 1930, and it follows a real-life woman named Lee Miller. She started off her career as a model, but ended up learning to be a photographer instead. This book follows a very formative year of her life when she lived in Paris. She started off not really having any friends or any idea of how to be a photographer. Soon on, she does make a connection with Man Ray, who was already a well-known photographer at the time, and she becomes his apprentice, and while she's working as his assistant, she's also learning photography skills from him. The two of them also develop a romantic relationship as well, and we see how they start to fall in love with each other, but then how they start to fall apart and the mistakes that they each make with their relationship. So I will admit, I knew nothing about Lee Miller or Man Ray before I read this book. I went into this completely blind. If you already know about them, you might find this really fascinating. For someone like me who knows nothing about these people, I still found it very interesting, and it really made for a wonderful story. It's really interesting getting to know the kind of bohemian side of Paris in the 1920s and 1930s, and I really like seeing how Lee was such an ambitious but also troubled woman. It's interesting how she really wanted to change her career and be the person who takes the photographs instead of being the one who's photographed. And I really like seeing her kind of troubled relationship with Man Ray. They're good to each other in some ways, but also definitely bad to each other in other ways. It's also always wonderful to see women who are forging new paths for themselves and really spearheading things that women hadn't really been able to do before that. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it as well. So all in all, I really enjoyed this book. I didn't fully 100% connect with it, but I did really get a lot out of it, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. So those are all 4 books that I read for my April reading challenge. There were a lot of books that I wanted to get to, I actually intended to read, and I just didn't get to. A lot of that is because I keep getting a lot of ARCs lately, and I need to start probably saying no to some of them. I did really love them, by the way, but there were definitely some books that I had hoped to get to, and I just didn't get a chance to. Probably the top books that I wanted to read and didn't get a chance to read are The Ladies of the Secret Circus by Constance Sayers, The Paris Hours by Alex George, Goodbye Paris by Anstey Harris, and a new book that I just picked up in April, interestingly, called The Caretakers by Amanda Bester Siegel. There are also other books that I have that are set in Paris that I wanted to read and I just didn't have time for. Some of them because they're intimidatingly long, like this one. So with all the other unread Paris books that I have, I might need to do another Paris reading challenge, maybe 2, maybe 3, until I finally get caught up on them. And if you participated in my challenge, please let me know what Paris books you read this month. I'd love to know what you're reading and whether you recommend it, and maybe I'll add it to my list and just add to my never-ending Paris books list. Also remember that this is only 4 of the 10 books that I read in April. For my wrap-up of the other 6 books, stay tuned, that will be out in a couple of days, and I'll talk about the other 6 books I read which were not set in Paris. Going forward, I'll probably have 2 wrap-ups each month. Part of that is because I do read enough books in a month that it's hard for me to get them all into one video without making it stupidly long. The other part is also because I wanted to separate out the reading challenge books from the other books I read, and spoiler, I am planning to start a Patreon account, and I'm thinking that starting in June, I'll make the reading challenge videos like this one available specifically for my patrons. So we'll see. That's kind of what I'm thinking about right now. I'll have more announcements about that once I kind of get everything solidified. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. And to make sure you don't miss any more of my videos, please ring the bell to get all my notifications. I put out about 2 to 3 videos like this one every week, including listicles and wrap-ups and vlogs. So there's a lot going on. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!